You have a part in your book where you sort of suggest that the galaxy itself is kind of a grand chakra system.
Yeah.
And that being that we're sort of 26,000 light years away in our solar system from the core of the galaxy,
Right.
that and the precessional cycle also is 26,000 years, that we seem to sort of be in a certain bandwidth, that like this cycle dynamics maybe kind of makes us rise and fall between. And so what I asked you then, and I'm kind of curious about, does this sort of mean that we as humans, whether we reincarnate or just our species as a whole, are we sort of forever stuck in this bandwidth? Or do we have the potential of moving, further, up the higher levels of like sort of consciousness?
Well, I think we do, and that's all about free will choice. But in order to shift the consciousness, a sacrifice is always necessary. To get from one level to the next in the game of consciousness expansion, one has to sacrifice one's attachments to the level of reality that one is trying to transcend.
And to bring it back to kind of that, the illustration, sort of, how do you see the galaxy as being like a chakra system comparative to like the human body itself?
Yeah, that's an interesting idea that I brought out in my book, Galactic Alignment, that we basically have two different precessional alignments going on in the 21st century. One is an alignment to the center of the Milky Way galaxy, and one is an alignment to the Pleiades. Now, the Pleiades have always been thought of in esoteric traditions as being the realm of the seventh level of consciousness, the realm of higher consciousness. So, with the spirals of the galaxy, you can sort of like look at the galaxy from above and see that the galactic center is the root, and then the Pleiades would be out here like on the seventh plane of consciousness. And with the alignments that are going on, it's kind of like this conduit of energy is opening up. So you can envision 7 discrete levels of chakras going on. I know, can you believe it?
For a quick illustration, sort of, how would the galaxy look like if it's a grand chakra system itself?
Well, if you would look at the galaxy from above, it looks like a spiral, and the galactic center is at the core. So each spiraling arm is like a discrete energy level, sort of like in the chakra system you have the different levels of consciousness. And the Pleiades would be out beyond us, out into the outer part of the galaxy. That would be the realm of higher consciousness. So the Earth is situated sort of like, by analogy, in the position of the 5th chakra. This is the chakra of language, ideation, mentation, conceptualization. This sort of speaks for what the preoccupations of modern humanity are.
And what would you describe those as? I mean,
well, it has to do with it's a concept-driven world. We're about thought, thinking, ideas, and about language. All the different languages that are happening on the planet right now. But with the two precessional alignments that are happening in the 21st century, one pointing to the galactic center and one pointing to the Pleiades, this suggests a situation in which we can integrate the higher and the lower, which we can open up to the energies of the lower, transforming them into the manifestation of the higher potential that we have.
So do you see it as then the highest level of sort of consciousness in the galactic chakra system? Is that the galactic center, or is that the Pleiades on the opposite end, further away?
Well, it really requires an integration of the higher and the lower. So you can't really locate higher consciousness at the galactic center or the Pleiades. It's really more about the energy that comes through when those two doors are opened up, and the integration occurs right here on Earth.
So do you think, I've been meaning to ask this, because this alignment after the galactic alignment with the galactic center, and then the Pleiades on the other side is going to be, lining up soon after that, and that's like kind of a direct line. Is that rare as far as this alignment goes, beyond, 26,000 years before this or after this? Because that doesn't actually happen with the Pleiades every time?
That's right. The two different precessional alignments operate in different ways. The alignment between the solstice sun and the galactic center happens once every 26,000 years. It's regular. The alignment between the Pleiades, the sun, and the zenith really only happens once, as far as we can tell.
like in all of history.
Yep.
So this is not. So this might have to do even more with the significance of the monuments, like why the calendar ends in 2012 and why the pyramid in Chichen Itza of Kukulkan
Yeah.
is built towards the Pleiades, because
Right.
it seems like this is an astronomically rare alignment with like the odds are. I mean, the odds are astronomical to be happening, right?
For both of these to be coordinated with roughly the same time, the 21st century, is incredibly rare. It's really bodes a situation that's unprecedented, and I think that the Maya were tuned into the different energy weather that humanity experiences, and it's sort of like the vast seasons of change that the Earth undergoes. So I think for this reason, the Maya were trying to point to this time that we are currently living in as being a time of great energetic opportunity for spiritual transformation of the planet, a time of transformation and renewal for sure. But within the spiritual teachings that we find in the Maya creation myth, there's still an element of free will. Nothing's predetermined. There's still that element of free will where we can open up to the highest possible potential of this, or we can close down in fear, fear of the unknown. So it's really about a great possibility, a great time of opportunity that we have.
That's only ever going to basically occur once in history, as far as we're aware of, correct?
Yeah.
I mean, so would you say? I guess my two questions are. I mean, would you say that this is just basically astronomically, like improbable to the point of that it might be like maybe grand design behind it? I mean, it just seems like, to be a person being alive in this time when this occurs. I mean, I guess it's before I ask the second question. I mean, do you think that this like almost points to that it's like grand design within this whole thing, or?
I believe that I wouldn't call it. What do they call it?
Intelligent design.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily call it intelligent design because there's certain things that come with that idea, but I basically agree with that perspective that there is purposiveness in the universe. This is a philosophy called teleology. In other words, that the end state of something is implied in all the previous stages. In other words, history is moving towards something. It's kind of like the unfolding of the flower. The purpose of the flower is the bloom. And I think this is a really profound idea that is greatly underrated. And modern science basically dismisses the idea of teleology because it does imply that there's some kind of creator or something like that. And science likes to deny that. I think there's a more sophisticated way to talk about this. Basically, when you really think about it, though, it's interesting because the purpose of life, what is the purpose of life? The purpose of life is to grow. And it really seems to me that the universe is trying to evolve consciousness. Mm-hmm. That's like the ultimate adaptive strategy, if you want to put it that way. And so the universe will prioritize consciousness that is able to, integrate larger and larger and larger perspectives.
Well, so I mean, is teleology somewhat the concept that like within the tiny seed, lays the giant oak, but it needs to be unfolded, and the seed doesn't know what an oak is, but yet someday it will be, or within the caterpillar is a butterfly.
That's right.
And so, I mean, is that kind of possibly where we're at with humanity right now, that, we're just a caterpillar, we're just a seed, and that this energy is going to kind of come and ping us once in this rare event, and we're going to kind of blossom, we're going to become the butterfly or the, oak?
That's a great analogy. And we can't really see what lies beyond the veil.
As much as a caterpillar couldn't see what a butterfly would be, it couldn't even imagine it, right?
Exactly. And I'd like to sketch a metaphor with the transformation or the metamorphosis of the caterpillar into a butterfly. There's something very interesting about this process. When a caterpillar builds its cocoon, the caterpillar goes inside of it, and it's basically just transformed into an aqueous fluid. It doesn't just grow wings and turn into the butterfly. It just dissolves into this fluid. And inside of that
Really?
fluid, there are these things called imaginal cells that emerge. And the imaginal cells basically start putting out orders to direct the formation of the caterpillar, to direct the transformation of the caterpillar into the butterfly. Now, during a certain period of this transformation, there are still remaining cells which see the imaginal cells as a foreign substance, a foreign body. And so the protective mechanism will kick in and try to destroy the imaginal cells. I think this is what we have going on in the culture and the transformation of civilization. You have certain people that are like the cultural creatives, you might say. They're the imaginal selves that are trying to create the template for this new world, and yet at the same time you have regressive sort of fundamental elements that are trying to destroy the creative types, who are really trying to push the thing beyond the limitations. So that's really an interesting metaphor by which we can understand how the world is transforming.
And then I guess the important thing to note in that analogy, though, is that the cells that remain from the caterpillar never went out.
That's right.
And the caterpillar always does come.
Well, they can. There is the possibility that the process will become aborted, in a sense. In the same way that a woman who's pregnant, there's a certain percentage of just spontaneous abortions. It
That's
just
true.
doesn't happen. So this is where the element of free will really comes into play.
We have to
we didn't
create
have
the
free
healthy
will,
environment for it.
then we just live in a clockwork, predetermined universe, and we'd all be robots.
So, and then I guess another thing within that analogy too is, being that like the actual caterpillar doesn't sprout wings and everything and actually dissolves. I mean, to some degree, that sort of speaks that our society itself sort of needs to dissolve before it can reemerge. And that's, I mean, if we look at America right now, it's kind of dissolving. Much of the world is sort of dissolving. National borders are dissolving. I mean, is this a similar process? I mean,
it absolutely is, and this is one of the harder truths to sort of grasp, is that, in a sense, things need to dissolve into a chaos, you might say. Things need to return to a state, sort of a state of pregnant possibilities, a chaotic state of pregnant possibilities, out of which can be created a new world, a new world that is a new world that is better prepared for a sustainable future.
and I think that's like, isn't that interesting though, that trend is kind of coming about, the green movement, the sustainable movement,
Right.
that's a really popular thing.
Okay.
Okay.
No, absolutely. It's not that there's going to be complete annihilation and destruction. This is a big place. And so things are going to be falling apart. Basically, what's going to be falling apart, however, are the things that are based on illusions. So those things need to fall apart. They can't be sustained.
They were never real in the first place.
That's
I mean,
right.
it's power that existed that, never really should have in the first place.
The charade is going to come crashing down, and that's a good thing.
But that's interesting because much of Western civilization is basically based on a charade. I mean, we buy cars with, imaginary currency that's debt.
Yeah.
We have rulers that rule over us with this power that, what power does one man truly have over another?
Right.
Yet we ascribe it to him. I mean, it seems like Western, and it's a continual growth that obviously if you went exponentially, continual growth would, consume the universe.
That's right. The gross national product has to increase every year, and if you project that out, it just can't possibly be sustained.
I mean, do you think it's safe to say then, which would probably piss a lot of people off, that basically our current, I don't want to say just Western culture has to die, but that kind of, I guess, global culture on a whole sort of must cease as it's progressing now in order for the new world to take place?
Yeah, there's certain directing forces and fundamental assumptions inside of Western civilization that must die, you might say. They either die or they drive us off the edge, So we can do a conscious transformation of this. We can look at this and we can embrace these things, which are really sort of manifestations of a shadow denial in our culture. Like we deny nature, we deny death, you know, and so we're always trying to make up for that by creating artificial systems that can, you know, put that off. But it sort of gets down to a really profound meditation that, you know, immortality is not living forever. Achieving immortality is embracing death. When one embraces death, then one can finally see the eternal essence that lies at the root of human life.
Yeah, I mean, how did I really like this whole life and death metaphor that the Mayans had. I mean, what did the Mayans see in death? Because, I mean, we see death as just being like the end, you know, it's scary to us. So we try to, you know, shuffle it away so that it's not so threatening. But what did they see it as?
Well, they believe that there's a great stone carving that portrays the two sides of a human face. One is covered in flesh, the living face, and the other is the skull. This means that life and death go together. Death feeds life, and life feeds death.
So, and when someone died, did they see it as like kind of almost some sort of a rebirth too? Is there that kind of death and rebirth cycle, rejuvenation? Does that exist in their concept?
There wasn't so much an idea of reincarnation, and there isn't that idea that's really preserved in Maya religion today. It's more like transformational continuity between realms. And the realm of the dead is the realm of the ancestors. So it's like you're going to a place that you're going to like being.
Your grandma and grandpa are there, right? Yeah.
There is a kind of reincarnational idea in that a grandchild is referred to as the little grandparent. The grandchild and the grandparent are seen to be close to death. One has just come out of the realm of the other world, and the grandparent is about to return to the realm of the other world. So there is this sort of like life and death cycle that's seen, but a grandchild is thought to be the replacement of the grandparent.
That's interesting because, I mean, I've always noticed it seems like, you know, grandchildren and grandparents seem to, really like each other, get along well together, and that they sort of seem like they just have a same outlook on life. They both seem pretty happy and innocent.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like, you know, because like they are close to the same sort of energy, and it seems like a happier energy. So, I mean, what does that say about the realm of death? I mean...
Well, the realm of death is the great unknown, really. And it is a mystery. We can say some things about it because we seem to, you know, I think that death is thought of in these indigenous philosophies as being the realm of the uncreated, the realm of the unmanifest. It's like the matrix from which the world springs, the world of manifestation and form and objects and things and multiplicity springs from this unified, undifferentiated realm of eternal, infinite possibilities. The pleroma, as they say in the Gnostic religions.
So, to kind of get it back to the whole galactic chakra system, so what kind of are the implications then that that the you know the galaxy itself that we live in is sort of an echo? It's like a greater sort of echo of our own
That's
selves.
right.
What's the implication of that?
Well, the profound idea in this, of course, is based on the idea that the microcosm reflects the macrocosm. So something going on in the outer universe is actually reflecting something going on the inside of humanity. Now, we all have our own sort of chakra system inside of us. So by way of analogy, it's reasonable to suspect that there's a kind of activation that's going on inside of our own spiritual bodies, our spiritual lives. We're opening up to the primal cosmic energies that reside inside of us, but that are reflected in the larger cosmos. So it's really an incredible situation of awakening. I like to think of 2012 and the galactic chakra system and the galactic alignment as a situation of awakening and remembering. We are remembering our true selves. You know, we're opening up the doorways that can allow us to manifest the energy through our bodies that are basically sort of universal cosmic energies in so doing, we will achieve our full potential as human beings if we can open up our hearts and minds and bodies to this transformational energy.
So, because you kind of talk about how it's sort of like a 200-year window possibly in your book. You want to talk about that? Because I guess we haven't really recorded you saying anything
Sure.
about that. And then I was going to kind of say, how long a process for humanity is this going to be? I mean, is it going to be a slow, arduous process, or is it going to? Because most people seem to think this is like, the clock strikes
Right.
midnight, and we're gonna phase shift in
Yeah.
the fourth dimension and such, and.
Yeah, it's one of the several misconceptions or misnomers, or just sort of like not realistic ways to think about it, that it's something to happen precisely on December 21st
Yeah.
of 2012, at dawn or something like that. It just doesn't really work like that. These are sort of like processes that wax and wane. It's kind of like the full moon. The full moon waxes to fullness. For all intents and purposes, the moon looks full for a couple of days, and there's that sort of maximum sort of possibility around that full moon zone. The galactic alignment really can be talked about as a 36-year window. So this would be considered the time of maximum opportunity. It's really, if you look at the dynamics and the energy, it's the end of descending Kali Yuga. And there's a lot of arguments around that, but one can really access the information on that and understand that it's the end of descending Kali Yuga. It's the point of maximum spiritual darkness. But in the Yuga doctrines, they believe that human beings have the greatest potential for transformation at the point of maximum darkness. That means that just a little bit of spiritual work, a little bit of self-reflection, a little bit of meditative awakening and introspection can be extremely, extremely powerful.
So just like one match in the dark lights it all up, kind of a thing.
That's right. That's right.
And why? I mean, why is that? Why is it that that's? I mean, because you would think that the most fertile time would be at actually the opposite end, where it's just everyone's floating around like Jesus just because they're bombarded with so much of this energy or whatever. But instead, it seems like that it's the pit of hell is where all these traditions say no. That's where the most growth can take place. That's the most fertile soil for your soul.
Well, it's like you said. That's a good analogy. One match in the darkness. If somebody's standing in the center of a football field at night and they light that match, people in the stands are going to see it.
That's true.
If it's blazing high noon and somebody lights a match, nobody's going to see that.
People are
match.
going to go, great, yeah, it's plenty light, thank you.
So one person waking up during the so-called golden age, when which within these cycles of time would be half a precession cycle away from now.
Which 12,000,
13,000 years ago, that was the pinnacle of spiritual light on the planet.
And is that and 13,000 years from now again it should be.
Yeah, within the model that's sort of how it works, and there's got to be something to that in terms of the seasons of energetic change that are experienced on the Earth.
And I mean that's I know you, because we've discussed this, you don't necessarily buy into the idea of Atlantis and all that kind of stuff, but I mean that isn't that around when if a civilization like that existed, that's when they say it existed before, it's like.
Well, I buy into the whole legend of Atlantis. I think has become way too literalized, so that we now believe that there was an actual continent, and maybe there was, maybe there wasn't. But I think the more important idea in this is that there was a time long ago when the spiritual light on the planet was at a maximum expression. Consciousness of the consciousness of humanity was awake and open to its full potential, and we've been in a phase or a process of forgetting that for 13,000 years. This is kind of an abstract model of these things, in the same way that we have, seasons. They're not really abstract; they're based upon astronomical realities. But we have, summer, fall, winter, and spring, and so ideally within this model, it snows in the wintertime. However, we do get snow sometimes in the spring.
That's true.
So, it's all about sort of potentials and possibilities. But yeah, it's fascinating to think about this in terms of Atlantis being what I like to think about with Atlantis is that it's about the rise and fall of a galactic consciousness. And by galactic, I mean a kind of holistic, and a holistic awareness that is in touch with its essence. Right now we live in a phase of human civilization in which consciousness is fixated on externals, on the surface of reality, where it's a kind of thingism. And all we see around us are things. We're not tuned into the essence. We don't see the unifying essence that lies at the root of the manifest world, of phenomenon. And this isn't meant to be sort of like, you know, an airy-fairy kind of mysticism. It's really wisdom teachings that are encoded at a very deep level in all of the world's great religious and spiritual traditions. That humanity and the consciousness of humanity moves from extreme to extreme, where we get, you know, we're focused on the essential, we know the essential root of consciousness, we're aware of it, and then we forget it. And then we get sucked into seeing only the surface of things, the veil of illusion. And that seems to be the way it works, you know, and the period of time in which we are sort of lost in the veil of illusion is the period of time when egoism rules. So that's kind of what we're dealing with right now, is processing our egoic shadow projections to re-embrace them so that we can achieve a kind of unity consciousness once again.
Have you ever gotten a bead on like a true Mayan elder at all?
Sure, there's several different Mayan elders that one can talk to. I'm also very interested in Maya intellectuals that are coming out of the schools and the universities now. There's a trend, there's a lot more higher education happening. There's Victor Montejo, who wrote a book about the Mayan Renaissance. I do believe that history will look back on this period and see it as a great period of renaissance of Maya culture, and in a larger context, indigenous cultures, indigenous philosophies. There's a core perspective that indigenous cultures hold that I think would be very, very beneficial for Western civilization to embrace, and that's the idea of partnership. As opposed to the dominator style, which really is the hallmark of Western civilization. So we need to sort of sacrifice our obsession with dominating other cultures and territorialism and usurping resources for ourselves. It's all about greed. And the corporations of the world are responsible for this to a large degree. They're not interested in forming partnerships in any kind of real egalitarian sense with other entities. It's all just about maximizing their profits.
Well, and that we can control their system. You know, here we'll give you this little bit of food, but like it's like under our control. Yeah.
Yeah, it's all about you know, controlling wealth and controlling people. So Victor Montejo would be a person to talk to. I believe he's a scholar at one of the universities in Southern California. Another voice coming out of Guatemala is Gaspar Gonzalez, who wrote a book about 2012. It's in Spanish. It's being translated right now. And he talks about the dynamic of greed and egoism in the world today. And of course, this is really a core idea, because in the Maya creation mythology, in the hero twin myth, the basic spiritual message has to do with putting ego, Seven Macaw in the Popol Vuh, or the hero twin myth, putting ego back into its proper place, back into right relationship with the kind of consciousness that is exemplified by the father of the hero twins, one Hunahpu. So there's this ego, divine consciousness sort of like dynamic going on here, and so that's another voice that's good. There's a shaman daykeeper named Don Alejandro who's been very active in doing sort of a uniting of the indigenous groups from South America up to Canada, and that's really important work that he's doing.
And then kind of in the jungles, was there any like, oh, how the hell did you figure all this stuff out? Like when you looked at all the hieroglyphs, you know, and like kind of figured out, you know, the alligator meant the Milky Way. I mean, did you just put that together, or did you have to go read and kind of figure out what their symbols sort of meant to them, or?
Well, how did I figure all this out? I guess I would say that over many years of reading the academic literature, I understood the various different disciplines that are necessary in order to understand the background of the 2012 calendar and so on. So a lot of my work is really just based upon already known and accepted academic perspectives. You know,
And expanding on them?
yes, well, not just expanding on them, but integrating the whole picture. I call my work an interdisciplinary synthesis. And the problem is that this doesn't happen a lot in academia because you have specialists. And to the extent that specialists talk to each other and work together, you can get the whole picture on something, especially something like the reconstruction of an ancient paradigm. Now, there's a few key elements of my work that are sort of deductions that I've made, but they're rational deductions based upon astronomical orientations at the site of Izapa, for example, the iconography or the symbolism that's reflected on the carved monuments. And what I'm really focusing on is something very specific to the Izapan civilization. I'm going right down to the root, right back to the source of the 2012 revelation. Now, a lot of times critics will disqualify things that I say because they don't see any evidence for what I'm saying in the classic period Maya tradition. Well, this is like criticizing early Christianity because no 9th century monks said those things. You know what I mean? It's like it doesn't follow logically. I'm really interpreting the paradigm that was created by the people that created the 2012 calendar and the hero twin creation myth. So there's enough there at the site of Izapa, and it does relate to other sort of Mayan ideas. There is kind of a ebb and flow of the cultural tradition as it expands out. And in fact, some of the core ideas that were pioneered at Izapa did get adopted by the classic period Maya. So there are relationships. One of the most astounding things is that we have the hero twin creation myth, the Popol Vuh, that was recorded by Mayan elders in the 16th century. And the episodes that are recorded in the 16th century, many of them reflect what we see on the carved monuments of Izapa that are 1,700 years older than that recorded document. So there definitely seems to be a great continuity between the ideas that were pioneered at Izapa and what we have recorded by the Maya much later on.
That's interesting. So it's like it kind of got developed there, and then it became sort of legend with the Maya themselves. Did Izapa civilization sort of, just morph into the Mayan civilization? Was it just one city-state that then grew, or was it? How exactly did it work?
It's hard to say, really. There was a lot going on. For example, the murals that were found at the site of San Bartolo in the Petén jungle of northern Guatemala. Those are dated to about the time that the carved monuments of Izapa were being made, about the 3rd century BC. And they depict First Father doing the sacrifice. They depict the trees of creation. And you see similar trees on the carved monuments of Izapa. So I think what we're really dealing with here are the fragments of a huge cultural tradition that we're just beginning to understand. It was the great Maya archaeologist Gene Stewart who said in the 1970s that, what we see in the jungle down there today is just 1% of what was there. So we really have our work cut out for us, But I guess I'd answer that briefly by saying that there were core ideas pioneered at Izapa within the Izapan cultural tradition or Izapan civilization that the ball game, the creation myth, and the long count calendar as sort of like an integrated complex that definitely became the hallmarks of the classic period Maya.
And then as far as kind of the I know that the Mayans had all their information sort of stored in these codices that they had, and that those were destroyed by,
Yeah.
to the large extent, by the Spaniards. In the remaining codices, I mean, is much of this kind of mentioned, or is, you know, that's been translated? Is any of this tradition?
Well, your question, Sean, touches upon a very recent breakthrough in academia that I'd like to sort of mention. Uh, in regards to the surviving codices, we have basically four, and the most famous one is the Dresden Codex.
Right.
And there's a sequence of numbers that are found alongside the coils of a serpent, so it's called the serpent sequence. The serpent sequence in the Dresden Codex has been a great mystery to scholars for many years because there are huge numbers, like going back 15,000 years and 30,000 years. It was suggested by Susan Milbreth that these large numbers may have something to do with the precession of the equinoxes. Now, another scholar picked up on this, Barbara McLeod. She's an epigrapher, very well respected, and she noticed that there are intervals in the classic period chronicles from Copan and other places that highlight an interval of 71.15 years. This is the number of years that it takes precession to move one day. So she hypothesized that this meant something very significant, and her further research basically reveals that the classic period Maya did have a mechanism for tracking precession, and it was actually related to Maya kingship. Now, the serpent sequence in the Dresden Codex is really interesting because there's another scholar named Michael John Groff who wrote his PhD thesis, and he decoded the serpent sequence in the Dresden Codex as indicating that the Maya were definitely tracking precession. And one of the concepts that he uses in his reconstruction involves the sun and the Pleiades and the zenith. So my book that came out 10 years ago, Maya Cosmogenesis 2012, pioneered this idea that there's a relationship between tracking precession using these changing dynamics between the sun and the solar zenith passage day and the Pleiades.
And so by going back and sort of looking for that in the Dresden Codex, he basically was able to decipher it and find out that indeed written is, you know, Mayan written confirmation of your theory.
Well, in a sense, and there's still work to be done, but it's definitely a breakthrough because at this stage there are Maya scholars like Anthony Avini and Ed Krupp who are not willing to endorse the idea that the Maya were aware of precession.
So what the hell do they have to say now that this has come out? I haven't talked to them? Or?
Well, the jury's still out. You know, they're sort of not committing to anything in particular until the research can be looked at. But it's very clear that you know, we can no longer say that the Maya were not aware of precession. Of course, this is a very fundamental basis to my own work. I mean, the subtitle for my book was originally Precessional Cosmologies in Mesoamerica. And of course, there's the precessional tracking method that involves the Pleiades and the zenith and the sun, and then there's the precessional tracking method that involves the December solstice sun and the dark rift in the Milky Way. So I think that my work was pioneering in the sense that I showed how the astronomical features that are involved in the galactic alignment in 2012 are front and center in the Maya creation mythology, in the ball game symbolism, and in king-making rites, as well as depicted on the carved monuments from Izapa.
And when you talk about, like, if we look at Izapa, is it mainly the evidence there is just the alignments of like the ball court and like sort of the symbolism in the artifacts there, or is that also like the stelas that were removed from there that are now in museums and such as well? I mean, what all was at the site when it was originally discovered?
Well, everything was there at the site pretty much, but as early as the 40s, some of the carved monuments started to be sort of looted, you know, taken away, and one of them was actually recovered from looters. It's kind of an interesting story. Well, Izapa was a place that pioneered the core ideas of Mayan cosmology, and the calendar. Izapa thrived over 2,000 years ago, and there's enough surviving at the site that's undisturbed.
What a big ant.
Wow, they're crawling up.